Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sustainable Design Masterclass. We're bringing on some of the top regenerative designers that we can find to show you better ways to move forward, to regenerate landscapes, to grow better farms, to tie your livelihood into regenerating the ecosystem which we rely on. So before we get started on this webinar, I want to make sure you guys all want to get the most out of it. So turn off your Facebook, turn off your phones. I know it's easy to get distracted, but you want to be present for this because we got a really cool presentation coming up with Frank. So Neil and I launched the Sustainable Design Masterclass in order to bring you weekly interaction with folks who are doing a fantastic work in the field of sustainable design, regenerative farming, entrepreneurship, all these great things which we're going to need in the future. And we're really excited to bring on Frank Golbeck today. And I'm going to let Neil carry this away because he's got some cool things he wants to talk about with Frank.
Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar. I first met Frank about 3 years ago, I think, and Frank's here, but you can't see him. We had some camera issues, but he can hear everything, and he's going to be talking in just a bit. Frank is the co-founder of Gold Coast Mead, and I remember thinking, I visited one of his, it's not a brewery if it's mead, is it, Frank? But I visited, his Meadery. I visited one of his facilities a year ago and was really impressed with everything he was doing and seeing all the growth of his business. And then I saw a post he did a few months back where he's using the revenues from his mead to start California's first organic apiary. And that was when it clicked with me that Frank and I are very much on the same page with some things here. I'm a big advocate of using business and entrepreneurship to fund regenerative agricultures and to create markets for products that are sustainable and that do well by use of the land. And so when Frank posted that, I was like, I need to get him on the webinar and find out what he's doing and where he's going with all this. So without further ado, Frank, I'm going to turn this over to you. We are really excited to have you on and excited for everybody else to be here who's attending. And we'll talk a little bit. Hold your questions till the end, folks, and we'll do a little group chat at the end. So, Frank, I'm turning it over to you.
Awesome,
all right,
guys.
buddy. Away we go.
Stoked to be here with y'all, and thanks for the opportunity to share about Gold Coast Mead and what we're doing to use mead to light the world. It's been a bit of a journey, 7 years as a professional meadery and 12 years now as a mead maker, and it starts with my grandfather before that. But I'm going to share all that story, and I'm going to dive into what we're doing with the bees and how we're going to make the first organic honey that I know of in California. It's a tough bar to clear because the bees need 27 square miles of organic pasture to make organic honey. And finding that much organic land has been difficult so far, but it all unfolded beautifully, like things seem to do when we're doing the things that we're stoked about doing on all levels. So, forgive me here, my clicking ability has gone away, but that's because I've got there we go. All right, bam and bam, cool. So that's me, that's my meadery, those are my two co-founders. I'm Frank. We've got Prav and Joe there in the picture. We were friends in college, and we would drink mead together because my grandfather made it. I'll get into my backstory more, but I want to launch right into, and we've got some shiny tanks. Wanted to show you our shiny tanks. That's the 1,000 square feet that we started in. We have 3,600 square feet now. We're in over 300 stores here in Southern California. We also have distribution in New York, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. So mead is definitely growing, and we've got a lot more opportunity in front of us. But we're really stoked about this project that we're going to share with you today. And I want to start with a question. How many of you guys know what this picture is? Can I get a show of hands? And I think that means if you go into the, you guys know how to, okay, who knows? There we go. Unless, baby, that's right. So how many of us know what this picture is from? Can I get a show of hands? Oh, beautiful, there's some hands. There's a hand. Kevin knows. Michael on knows. Who else? Okay, only two? Maybe
I'm
only
sure
two.
a lot of folks know what this is.
Yeah, it's from the Lorax, right? And like, it's the end. Industry has come to this like beautiful valley and chopped down all the trees and made the water like gummed up, and you know the swoomy swans have taken off, and the brown barbaloots. Like, it's a great little parable about industry not taking the constraints of nature into its planning, and then as a result, the ability to support life is totally reduced. And at the end, you know, the Onceler, the guy who ran the business that kind of gummed up everything, throws the last seed for the last truffle tree to this kid who's listened to this whole story. And I really identify with that. And I imagine that you guys do too. That's why we're in this class. That's why we're in this movement. It's like, okay, we want to make a living, but we want to do it in a way that makes the earth more capable of supporting life. And so what can we do that accomplishes both of those things? And hopefully my story that I'm going to share with you lays that out in some detail. And at the end, I'll share a couple of questions that have really helped me in my journey kind of focus on the thing that I really love and feel like I can do that does help the earth and creates a livelihood for my family and my team. So there we go. So today, as we know, monoculture agriculture is depleting the soil, resulting in reduced biodiversity, lost habitat, climate change. And it really is reducing the Earth's capacity to thrive. So it's not just agriculture, but alcohol production as well. Beer and wine are these huge fields of only one thing where the farmers are incentivized to kill everything else in that field. So what we're drinking has an impact. And the bees are kind of part of this story too. When there were a network of small family farms where they maybe had a cash crop but then had a bunch of other crops that they consumed themselves or bartered amongst their community, bees thrived. Now that we have these huge monocultures, and this is a picture of beehives in the almond groves of Central California, they're exposed to pesticide, disease, tons of stress, and this is what the USDA has determined is causing colony collapse disorder. This thing where half of the bees, 40% of the bees die every year. So this is a major issue for our food system, and we're hoping that we can have an effect and reverse this trend where we had a peak of 5.5 million hives in the 1950s, and we're down to around 2.5 million hives. And this is important because bees gather pollinate 1 in 3 bites of our food. The loss rates we've seen have really gone up, and people have thrown a lot of dollars at this problem, and we're not seeing those loss rates really go down. New York Times just published an article about the biggest beekeeper in the country losing 40% of his hives over the last year. So he has something like 160,000 hives, and he lost some 54,000 of them. Just insane. So what if we could make a drink that conserves habitat, strengthens biodiversity, and helps the bees thrive? What if we could make a drink that is tastier, healthier, and better for the earth? So that's a kind of question that I think permaculture thinking begs us to ask. Like, how can we accomplish our objective of bringing a product to market that meets a customer's need while also taking care of people and planet and then the future? We believe we can, and I'm going to share how we're going to do it in the hopes that it will inspire you to look at the opportunities you see and maybe slide it over into your context. So we found 85,000 acres in Southern California, 30 minutes from Bakersfield, right in the Central Valley, near all those almond groves. And they have 40,000 acres of certified organic pasture. Millions, hundreds of millions of flowers. it's going to be really incredible. We're going to have the opportunity to make the first organic honey and turn it into the first organic mead made in California. So it's me from the mead interest, Landon, who's the preserve manager, and Jimmy, who's the beekeeper. All of us have this desire to shift the food system, but we're all working within the context we're currently coming from, right? I've got a mead business to run, Jimmy's got a beekeeping business to run, and Landon's got a preserve that he's got to look out for. But we all see this great opportunity to work together and make something that happened that's never happened before. So we intend to place 400 hives on the preserve and make the first certified organic honey, make the first certified organic mead. Again, it takes the bees 27 square miles of organic pasture to make organic honey. They'll fly 3 miles from the hive. And we're hoping that this will shift the beekeeper's business model. Currently, he makes 80% of his revenue from pollination and only 20% of his revenue from honey. In the 50s and 60s, there were beekeepers that were making 80% of their revenue from honey and 20% from pollination. It was just a little side gig that they did for their neighbors. But now the industry has really relied on it. The globalization of the honey market has really driven the price down of honey, and now beekeepers have to compete with commodity honey. So it's not really worth their time to market and produce really high-quality honey. They just kind of sell it to brokers or packers, and it gets homogenized, filtered, and cooked so that it has a uniform color, because that's what the food industry values the most out of this food that was sacred at one point. It takes the bees visiting 2 million flowers to make 1 pound of honey. So 1 pound of honey has all of this awesomeness, and it's been turned into just the brown honey bear that you see on the shelf and that never crystallizes. But instead, man, we can make a drink, and we can change the business model for the beekeepers, for the landowners, and for the mead industry, and hopefully connect the consumer with that whole process and value chain. So I'm going to start talking about kind of my background with mead and how this all came to be, in the hope that it connects with you guys and you see some parallels with your own story. And at the end, we'll kind of dig a little bit deeper into the regenerative honey story and the precedent for it and where it can go and what our vision is as a business. Because in line with permaculture, like, I don't want to run some monolithic mead company that becomes the Anheuser-Busch of the mead world. I want to inspire other meaderies to get started in their own regions and create this wonderfully value-added product that can connect beekeepers with higher revenue so they can take better care of their bees, incentivizing them to find landowners who take better care of their land so they can make better honey, and then we can make better mead, and now we can compete in the alcohol space, which is a $200 billion industry. Alcohol in North America is $200 billion. There's plenty of room for mead to get a foothold and start to create dollars that are better for the earth, better for the bees, better for the people drinking it, better for the people making it, and build that industry that is different than, the Onceler and the Lorax. So I'm going to walk you through my background, which touches on my grandfather, touches on Krishna there, Beowulf, lots of people drinking good mead. So my first mead was, my first mead experience, I should say, because I was 8 years old and I didn't get to drink it. But it was watching my grandpa pour mead for his guests. And he would pour this golden drink that was just, it was like a potion. The people in the room would transform from kind of like intimidating foreigners to like friendly, laughing people. And it struck me that this golden drink my grandfather was pouring was some kind of potion. And I asked him what it was, and he goes, "Oh, it's an adult drink made from honey." And that stuck with me. It seemed awesome. But my grandfather had to close his tasting room, and mead kind of fell away from my life. But then I started encountering mead in a lot of different places. I read Beowulf, I read Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, and mead was in all of these books that are some of my favorite stories. And I started to dig a little deeper and found out that mead was all over the world, and it was probably the first alcohol that humans drank because we didn't need agriculture. We didn't need these huge fields of grapes or grain to make mead. We just needed to find a beehive and grab some of the honey and let it ferment. So that probably happened when a beehive flooded, in a tree like this picture, and spontaneously fermented. And our hunter-gatherer ancestors probably drank it and noticed its intoxicating effects and thought, this is pretty awesome. There's archaeological evidence of mead being made in 7000 BC China, so 9,000 years ago. And there's the argument that Sumeria was settled so that they could have access to beer. So these folks had drunk intoxicating substances before, and maybe those substances motivated our ancestors to give up a 5 to 10 hour hunter-gatherer work week for a 40 to 80 hour agrarian work week, so that we could have regular access to beer and wine because mead was too rare. And it's pretty cool in this context of permaculture. We talk about annual agriculture and the kind of devastating effects that annual agriculture has on soil. You look at the Loess Plateau and how the Loess Plateau just became a desert because it was over-farmed, among other places in the world, of course. But, did we do that so that we could have beer and wine? And by returning to mead, do we have an opportunity to regenerate that whole landscape? I hope so, and I think we're on the path of starting it. So mead was drunk all over the world, and it shows up in all of these cultures. In Africa, in the Horn of Africa, it's still drunk as tej and suwa, and some people speculate that it goes back to 20,000 BC that people were drinking mead. The Vikings, of course, were drinking it. It shows up in India and China, so all over Asia, people were drinking it. And Dostoevsky writes about it, right? I mentioned Beowulf in Harry Potter, but it's in the Rig Veda. Krishna walks across the universe and his footsteps are filled with mead. There's just so much history and mythology around mead, and it was totally forgotten about. Odin, who's the Zeus of the Norse pantheon, gets a drink of the mead that's there at the beginning of the universe, and he says, "A drink I took of the magic mead, and I began to know and to be wise, to grow and to weave poems." So mead is epic, and to bring it back is really a huge opportunity and honor, and we're stoked to be sharing it with you guys. So not only is there this wonderful historical element, but like we've been mentioning with the organic honey opportunity, more mead equals more bees equals more life. So we have this opportunity to make mead and create a better livelihood for beekeepers so they can take better care of their bees, and then we can tie that into the landscape and the connection the bees have with the landscape, because the bees are fundamental to the reproduction of a number of flowering plants. So by having more bees, can we make those flowering plants more productive? We think so. But furthermore, if we have beekeepers who are now getting paid premiums for high-quality honey, they're going to want to find high-quality land that can produce this high-quality honey. So there's going to be an incentive for them to partner with landowners and conservation groups and regenerative farms that have access to year-round flowering plants, and then hopefully pay rent to those landowners. So I'm going to get a little bit more into that further down with a little bit of a case study from Eastern Washington. But this is, I hope, really inspiring you guys in the permaculture movement to think about the multi-functions that we're stacking here and how it all ties into mead. With mead, we can take a half a pound of honey, which as a commodity only goes for around $1 to $1.50. When I'm buying my honey in bulk, I'm paying 2 to 3 pounds. So a half pound is 50 cents, $1 to $1.50. And we can take that quantity of honey and turn it into a 750 milliliter bottle and sell it in our tasting room for $25. So there's a ton more value for that honey when the value is added through mead production. And that's with the mead market where it is now, where it's a fraction of a % of the overall alcohol market. If you look at the wine market, there are people that spend $15,000 on a bottle of wine. That's not me. But it gives you a sense for the range of where we could go here, especially with the story that a half a pound of honey is 1 million flowers. So one 750 milliliter bottle is 1 million flowers. If you're drinking that honey, or you're drinking that mead that comes from that honey, you're drinking those flowers. You're drinking that place. You're drinking that sunlight that was converted into honey and turned into an alcohol. And you're sharing that with your friends. So the opportunity to tell that story and create that value is huge. And we think a bottle of mead could easily go for 30 or 40 bucks if the story was told right. And then where does it go after that? Well, it depends on where the mead market is, which is why I'm stoked to be sharing this with you guys. You know, through open sourcing what we're doing, we're hoping to build a mead industry. And in fact, we're doing so. For 6 years, we were the only meadery in California. And because people had helped us, and we've been inspired by Marcin Jakubowski at Open Source Ecology, and we've been inspired by other winemakers who had really shown us tricks and tips in getting started, and breweries like Ballast Point and Hess Brewery down here in San Diego that have helped us at various points. Like, we started taking the same open door approach, and we now have 6 other meaderies in San Diego County and a 7th up in Orange County that we've helped get started and are launching this year. So we're now working with them to make the first mead festival, right? Like, mead is not like cars or TVs where you buy one and keep it for 6 or 10 years, whatever, depending on its planned obsolescence, right? With mead, like, you need a different bottle every night, and you're not going to be able to have a mead party with your friends if there's only one mead producer. So we're really open source and think that a rising tide would really raise all ships and give us the opportunity to compete with the big guys on quality and not quantity, on story and uniqueness, not homogeneity and lowest price. So, again, to tie in a little more, why does this matter? You've got 37% of global crops are pollinated by volume, but 75% by variety. So what does that mean? It means that the honeybees pollinate 44% of the top 100 stud crop varieties. So to be a little more technical about it, it's like 4 out of 10 bites of food would not be there without honeybees. I said earlier 1 out of 3, but it's really 4 out of 10, which is a little bit higher. And this is the reference for the research that proves that. We also have partnered with a local researcher at UCSD to solve some of the other diseases the bees are facing. So not just colony collapse disorder, which is this big systemic thing that takes organic honey and shifting the way that honey is produced and beekeepers make their revenue, but we've got some tactical problems to solve as well. They get this basically dysentery called Nosema, and Dr. James Knight at UCSD is doing research on that and came up with basically a vaccination. And we support him with 1% of our gross revenue. We give that to his lab to help him come up with solutions like this. And now he's looking for a corporate partner to bring this vaccination to market. So if anyone knows anyone, let me know. And my contact info will be at the end, as well as a shameless plug to sign up for our Mead Club. We're also really involved with the industry, both on the beekeeping side and the research and kind of academic side. So we went to this awesome conference called the Bee Audacious Conference, where global experts in beekeeping came together in Northern California, and we shared, just in this really kind of inspiring way, a collective harvesting of wisdom on like what's going on with bees across the world and what can be done to change it. And I was really stoked to share this vision for organic honey and high value mead, creating higher value for beekeepers. If you look at the grape market, right, it's not just raisin grapes that are grown, it's not just table grapes that are grown, it's this whole spectrum of grapes, from raisins and table grapes to table wine grapes to like high quality wine grapes to like exquisite quality wine grapes. And a small exquisite quality wine farm can take incredible care of their farm, their vineyard, and create a ton of biodiversity there. There's an incredible example in Sonoma called Benziger, and they do biodynamic wine growing and wine production, and stepping foot on that property is like stepping foot in paradise. I mean, this place is just so rich and teeming with life. And their business model is supported by their wine that they sell for like the lowest price, I think, is $28. The average price is $40 to $60. And then they have a couple in the high 80s to 90s, and it's just an incredible and beautiful place. And what if we could do this with beekeepers? The commodity guys that do the pollination for big ag in the transition period, but then in the future when we have this network of small, vibrant economies that trade locally, mead could be this cornerstone product that's produced in all these different bioregions and has this wonderful locality and creates so much value that it can support these local farms and local beekeepers to some extent. So how do we do that? We're going to make great mead and sell it to people who care about the earth, making their lives better. This is going to be our new packaging. It's really going to be kind of meeting the customer where they're at, because most people don't go into the store looking for mead, right? So our strategy is package it in the form that they're already looking for, and then once they find out that they love it, tell them this richer story about mead and what it's doing for the earth, and that by drinking it, they're building the earth that they want to live in and play in, and then hopefully we just repeat that, and hopefully we help other meaderies get started and share our business model in a kind of cooperative consulting process, and then we all win and we all get there a lot faster. So the market possibility is huge. Craft beer alone is a $19.6 billion industry with 22% year-over-year growth. Cider is $600 million. Kombucha is over $600 million. Sparkling wine in California is $500 million. So we have a lot of room to grow. The mead industry is probably like $30 million by my back of the envelope. And we're a small fraction of that, but we've seen a lot of growth, and we are stoked to be bringing this organic mead to market because we think it'll really make a splash and get on people's radars. Our end state, what if we could get $100 million in mead sales? That would mean $10 to $20 million in honey purchases, or 1% of the domestic honey market. But it would be 50% of the California honey market. And we'd be able to shift the honey market towards just fields of flowers kept all summer long. This is a picture of a clover crop. And clover is this incredible honey producer. It only takes 6 inches of rainwater to produce a honey crop from clover. For the bees, it is super healthy. They love working it all summer long and make this incredible honey with these wonderful cinnamon, nutmeg, spice notes to it. The USDA pays farmers to plant clover because it fixes nitrogen in the soil. So instead of these monocultures that deplete nitrogen and take tilling and cause desertification, we could have huge fields of clovers with bees working on top of it, fixing nitrogen into the soil, sequestering carbon, and really displacing the damage that is done by other models. And this is kind of the cycle, right? The mead maker gives more money to the beekeepers, who then create these partnerships with the landowners and pay the landowners to rent space for their bees. The abundant flowers on these regenerative ecosystems create more honey for the bees, which makes more opportunity for mead, and this virtuous loop that goes up. And this is my case study here. So the Lazy Art Ranch, where they practice holistic management, in 10 weeks of intensive grazing, the ecosystem transformed to just an incredible flowering landscape. And the herd was just on this piece of the property for 24 hours, right? There's incredible opportunities for honey production, and we're working with Sarah Bee Girl to help make this happen in other places. And we hope with our pilot project here in Southern California and her pilot project in Eastern Washington, we've got all the ingredients that we need to like publish this and share this with other permaculture practitioners and other meaderies so that we can get this horizontal replication going way faster than if we did it all vertically. This just highlights the opportunity. Like 8 gallons of honey paid in rent. Gallons means 12 pounds per gallon. That's 96 pounds of honey per hive in a place that's typically just kind of a spindly desert. So it's just so exciting to think that this is possible. And yeah, we'd love to share it with you guys as we prove that it works. So we've got a pretty big vision. We want to get 500 beekeepers, 500 to 1,000 hives. But that means that we need a healthy, vibrant mead industry to make it happen. It would shift 10 to 20% of the beehives being kept in America. It would create a whole new sustainable regenerative honey market. It would create additional value for the landowners. So land conservancy groups like Nature Conservancy could start to monetize their conservation efforts and maybe even invest in more biodiversity on their land. So instead of the kind of conservation that's like buy it, leave it alone, let it get to peak maturity, and then have no succession plan, instead have it managed to maximize biodiversity and then be able to monetize that to some extent. And monetize all those ecological services that a constantly renewing ecosystem provide to some extent anyways. With a $100 billion beer industry, a $38 billion wine industry, and a $60 billion spirits industry, we should be able to carve out less than 0.1% of the alcohol industry and make this happen. Just like our heroes Patagonia did for cotton and organic cotton and clothing. So, all of that laid out, I wanted to pose these questions to you guys, because my sense is that you're working on projects and you're taking these classes to get exposed to folks that are out there, you know, finding their project and really diving into it. And this question was asked to me by my wife. What would you do with all the time, money, and energy in the world? Which was like the best question ever. I was in the Navy working 16-hour days, 7 days a week after we'd run a ship aground, and it was probably one of the darkest times of my life. But luckily I made it through, and relative to what other folks in the service had to do, it was a cakewalk. But she asked me that question because I would come home and just lay on the floor and like not talk for 30 minutes after I got done with work. And she was like, this is not you. You are a happy, vibrant, creative, energetic person. Like, I don't think we want to live the rest of our life this way. And I was like, oh, we don't? So she said, what would you do with all the time, money, and energy in the world? You know, starting from that place of abundance. And so I sat with that question for a long time, and the complete answer was make mead and share it with people, farm, and live in community. So she was like, well, let's do that. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. She was like, but I guess you got to figure out how to make a living. And that's the trick, right? Like, which goes back to the Lorax story. It's like, yeah, you got to have industry, but you got to have it increase the Earth's capacity to support life. So what is that thing that you would do with all the time, money, and energy in the world? And how can that create a model that increases the Earth's capacity to support life? Another way to ask this question, and I think these two questions kind of lead from opposite ends, you know, what would you do with all the time, money, and energy in the world, is a really kind of open-ended, starting from abundance, kind of top-down perspective. But the bottom-up perspective that Jevin Brakanovich shared with me once was, what are you good at that you love doing that brings your life more energy than it takes? And I think that's a really cool way to get at it, too. It's like, what do you do already that's pretty unique or that your friends remark, this is cool. Like when we were sharing mead in college, people would be like, hey, can I get more of that? And they would drink 5 gallons in a night. And then epic dance parties would ensue, and our friends would be like, I'll give you money for that. So that was cool. And we loved doing it. What do you love doing that like really turns you on? And like if you get out of bed knowing that you get to do that thing that day, you're stoked. You're like, all right, whatever else I need to do, I'll do it because I get to do this awesome thing. And then brings your life more energy than it takes. If money is a representation of our energy, right? We give energy at our work to get money, and then we turn around and spend it on things that hopefully create more energy in our lives. So like we can think about money this way and our work this way, that it's energy. And if we put a little bit of energy in, what machine that we put it into yields more energy for us. But it can also be social energy, right? If we're whole systems thinkers, permaculture thinkers, energy has many different forms. Capital has many different forms. There's social capital that you guys are probably familiar with, the regenerative enterprise. But I just love that framework by Gregory Landaway and Ethan Rowland. Though Ethan recently changed his name. But if you look up that book, if you're not familiar with this concept, it's just wonderful that there are 8 forms of capital, and looking at how you use your energy to make more forms of those capital. And when you have an abundance of one kind of capital, you can harvest it to fill in where you're a little short. So social capital, you have a ton of friends on Facebook and wherever else, and you've got this great idea to start this project, but you don't have any funds. Like Kickstarter and other fundraising platforms are a rad way to harvest some of that social capital and transform it into financial capital so you can make those investments in your business and start to do that thing that you love and bring more energy back into your life. So, yeah, it's kind of a lot, kind of in rapid fire format, but I hope that it gives you the overview. I'm hoping to keep our time together here in about an hour, but I wanted to leave a lot of room for discussion and dialogue so that you guys can, look at the things that you do in your life and maybe see how it relates to this model that we've developed, and ask me questions about like how I got started and how I filled in the gaps. There were a lot of legal things that we had to consider to start an alcohol-producing business, and I'd be happy to share my thoughts on risk assessment and like when you hit go, even though there's some unknowns. I'd be happy to talk about partnerships and founding partnerships, like using the slicing the pie model, which is this great idea that what you risk should be divided by the overall amount that is at risk, and then that should be your stake. So that allows that ratio to shift in both the numerator, what you have put in and what you're risking, and the denominator, what the whole team has put in and what the whole team is risking. Because over time, those amounts are going to shift, and that framework is really cool and flexible. What else? Be happy to talk about beekeeping, the basics of mead making. Basically, take alcohol, take honey, mix it with water, ferment it. You get an alcoholic drink that's like beer, wine, champagne made from honey. Really delightful. And I'd love to answer any other questions you guys might have. So thanks. That's me. That's my wife who asked me that awesome question. Those are our 3 daughters. And our website, there, my email address, frankgolbeck@goldencoastmead.com. When you email me, you'll get an auto response, but I see every email that I get, and I try to respond to everyone. It just might take me a little bit. And then our online shop, where you can put some orders in online, or even join our mead club and get a quarterly shipment of our boundary expanding meads. We want our meads to be light and refreshing, modern, complex, and really engaging. So we've got a ton of meads that we share just through the mead club, and then we've got our standard meads that we also share through the mead club. So if you guys are interested in giving a try and supporting us in our work, I would love to sign you up to the mead club and establish that relationship with you too. So let me know what questions you guys got.
That
was awesome, Frank. Oh, jinx. Good
Uh,
stuff.
you're not the first person in this field, Frank, to bring up the Lorax. Um, Grant Schultz and I once had like a half-hour conversation on how the Lorax affected us as kids. So Dr. Seuss may have started us all down the path. Uh, but it's a funny common thread that I'm finding. I love what you're doing, man. I think it's fantastic, and I love your vision. And I'm glad we could bring you out. Let's do any folks' questions first. Let's hear from you guys first. I don't know if you saw this, Frank, but we've got Leslie over in Spain. She watches our webinars frequently. She said, "This is great. It fits completely into the project we're starting. Beekeeping here in Spain is having a really bad time, and our aim of regenerating our area and using ground cover and secondary cropping to provide food for the bees instead of having to take their hives, 200 kilometers away." So they're, you're a good model for them. Seema Nath over in India says, "Do you recommend any specific flour for making mead?"
Thanks, Seema. So there's a huge variation in the variety of honey that different varieties of flower will produce. Orange blossom is a really great go-to honey. Its characteristics are really light and floral, jasmine-y, citrusy, so people can make the connection in their minds really clearly between the mead that they're tasting with these wonderful floral, jasmine, citrus notes and the blossom itself. Like, I've had people tell me that drinking our orange blossom mead is like walking through an orange grove in bloom. But that said, like, there's a wonderful opportunity to explore your own local honeys and find the ones that have great fruity and floral flavor profiles. Malty and caramely and toffee flavor profiles also work really well. And then experimenting with different fermentation processes using different wine or beer yeasts. And UC Davis is really taking a lead. They're a world-renowned winemaking and beer-making university here in California. They're taking the lead on doing the research on honey. And I know that a winemaker from India, a professional winemaker from India, attended one of their advanced mead-making courses, which is pretty exciting. And we're working with them to develop a matrix of what kind of honey with what kind of yeast makes what kind of mead. But at this point, it's going to be pretty experimental. So starting with small 20-liter to 4.5-liter batches is a great way to get started and test it out on a convenient scale. What I'd say is avoid honeys that have overly medicinal or waxy or kind of herbaceous and vegetal qualities. There's some honeys that give like a leathery or even feline kind of flavor profile, and there's honeys that give, like I'm thinking of eucalyptus honey, can give a really intense menthol kind of medicinal character. So when you make it into a mead and the sugar has gone away, that flavor is really overpowering and kind of overwhelming. So when you're tasting honeys and deciding whether it's worth testing a batch, you're going to want to look for intense berry and fruit and floral notes first. Those are my favorites to work with. Or caramely and toffee and malty notes. And those are like my second favorite to work with. If you don't get those and instead you get something medicinal, I would steer clear of it. But that's going to be part of the fun of this regenerative ecosystem of meaderies that we're building, is that like each area's mead is going to be unique. So when I go to India and I taste your meads, I'm going to be drinking your place where that honey came from, and it's going to be a totally special experience that I'm going to pay a premium for, as opposed to just getting a homogenized mead that can be shipped all over the world, made from homogenized honey.
Very cool.
There's a really good question here on integrating, since you're on that ranch, Frank, I assume that you're integrating this beekeeping in those clover fields with somebody who's grazing that land. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And what does that interaction look like?
So,
Are there any risks to either one of those industries of integrating them together onto the same land base?
yeah, so you're going to want to find your bee places and fence them off with electric fencing. It keeps curious cows away, and also if you have any wildlife that might disturb the hives, like bears are an issue at the ranch that we're working on, well, preserve that we're working on. So we're going to have electric fencing out there. There's a few other things you can do. You can do a platform where you elevate the bees 6 feet off the ground and then set the posts that support the platform 4 feet in from the edge of the platform so the bears can't climb on top of the platform. The livestock operations, other than that, ranchers and beekeepers need to get along. So if they never worked with each other, kind of getting them to meet each other, getting them to be friendly with each other and recognize that they're both livestock managers and they both have a lot in common, even though they work with very different animals,
Yes.
seems to yield a big benefit. Our beekeeper has worked with ranchers before, so he's super on board, and our preserve manager is basically in charge of the livestock operation. So they've already established a good working relationship, and that's what I would recommend for people who are looking at going forward. Biologically, bees and cows have been getting along for a really long time. It was, in fact, the dairy herds that kept a lot of small bee operations in business because they would plant clover for the dairies, and the bees would make a ton of honey, and the beekeepers would sell that clover honey. So when small family dairies started to go out, beekeepers had less and less forage to keep their bees alive, and so it caused it was part of the reason that the shift from honey as primary revenue producer for beekeepers shifted to pollination as primary revenue producer.
Cool. John Allen asks, do you add any flavorings to any of your mead products, and what do you add?
Thanks, John. Yeah, we do. There's kind of a huge range of mead styles, and some of them call for flavors and additional ingredients, and some of them call for just pure honey and honey-only fermentations. Honey-only fermentations are the hardest to pull off because if beer is like a stew with all these parts in it, and wine is like a soup with more parts than a broth but less than a stew, right? The grapes are bringing acids and tannins. Honey is like a thin broth when you ferment it. What's left over is very delicate, and so adding a little pinch of salt will make a huge difference to the mead at the end of the fermentation, at the end of the production cycle. So we're really we urge caution when adding things to mead, and we urge going slowly, and you can always add more, but you rarely can take something out. So what we've been doing is really mastering our honey-only fermentation, and that's where you can really make sure that your basic fermentation is clean and tasty, and then add things to that. So we'll take a wildflower honey or a clover honey, we'll ferment it down, make sure it's nice and clean, and then we'll add a little bit of lemon and ginger and hibiscus, and it'll make a really refreshing, crisp, pleasing mead. But if you do that to try and cover up a kind of unhealthy, untasty fermentation, then it's going to be difficult to kind of fill that hole. So I would say, yeah, your imagination can run wild, but master that basic honey fermentation first, and you'll be on much more solid ground.
Cool.
Yeah.
I gotta say real quick, I had a bottle hung out with Grant Schultz. We drank mead after PV2, and that mead is fantastic. It's literally, it's the best mead I've ever had. If I had a choice between that and any fancy German beer, I'd throw the German beer in the trash and get the mead. I just ordered 9 bottles right No, wait, I ordered 6 bottles right during the webinar because I wanted to bring it to Elaine Ingham. Me and Frank were like, I'm bringing your mead to Elaine Ingham to celebrate, and I'm excited to do that, and I can't wait to get your mead again. It's
What an honor,
fantastic.
man. Thanks, John. Yeah. What she's doing for soil, we hope we can. I mean, she's inspired a lot of our thinking on soil, so that is a huge honor, brother. Thank you.
Cool. Glad.
Christina Hicks Hamblin says, can you talk a little bit about the difference between aged mead versus fresh mead? She's been making mead for a couple years, but she doesn't age it, and she's wondering how fresh mead would bottle up for sales.
Great. So, thanks, man. Like, you know that feeling when someone asks you a question on something that you've nerded out on for, like, years and you haven't been able to talk to anyone about it? I have that feeling.
Yeah.
So thanks, Christina. Okay, so aged mead is what's been on the market because it's a lot safer. Well, it's a lot easier to make. It's a lot more understood. And basically, people let the fermentation totally run to completion, then they'll let the yeast totally settle out, and then they'll add preservatives like sulfites and sorbates just to be safe because there's probably residual sugar left in the mead. And then you've got this still sweet wine with all these preservatives in it, and like, to me, mead is so much more than that. There's so much more opportunity, but the tricky thing is that making different meads, fresh meads, is way more technical. So, Christina, if you're interested in making fresh meads, you're going to want, if you're not already doing it, you're going to want to start doing your Brix readings, your specific gravity readings, and really monitoring your fermentation. So taking a Brix reading every other day and making sure that you have a healthy, vigorous fermentation. If you're not, dropping 2 to 3 percentage points of residual sugar during your fermentation, then you're going to want to research nutrient additions and oxygen additions during the first 3 days of fermentation. And this is getting technical, guys, so I'll abbreviate it. But basically, Christina, if you get a dry mead at the end of 2 to 3 weeks, then that product is going to be way safer. And if it doesn't taste as good as you want, it's probably a yeast health issue, and then you need to go back to your nutrient and aeration. And we can talk more offline about that. But we sell fresh meads. It takes us 2 to 3 weeks to make a batch of our stuff, and we typically age it for a week or 2, and then it's out in the bottles on the market after 4 or 5 weeks. And it's bubbly, and it's refreshing, and it's delicious. So it can be done. It just takes a lot of technical experimentation and process. But we're happy to share where we're at with that because we've already done it with all these other mead makers, and it's driving the mead market's growth.
Nice. Darren Melstead says to boil or not boil the honey when making mead. And he says, do you have any concerns about residues from large agricultural operations?
Okay. So boil is kind of a vestige of old mead making techniques and processes. People were concerned about the native yeasts and bacteria in honey taking over the fermentation and making bad mead. But I think that is representative of a less developed understanding of the biology going on in a mead fermentation. So honey has all these bacteria and yeasts and stuff, but it is so toxic an environment for them that they're in like total defense mode, and they're not ready to reproduce when you mix that honey with that water. So when you hit that honey and water with a inoculation of a controlled known yeast, you're going to add I'm not sure if it's trillions, but I think hundreds of billions of cells it's millions of cells per milliliter, like 80 million cells per milliliter is ultimately where your fermentation yeast gets if you follow modern mead production processes. So like 80 million cells per milliliter probably translates to trillions of cells per hectoliter. And basically, they're going to outcompete all the yeast and bacteria that was in that honey. So you don't need to boil it to win the fermentation battle and have a good tasting, high alcohol mead. The other benefit of not boiling is that you then preserve all the delicate honey aromas and flavors that boiling would otherwise drive off. Like, you don't boil your grapes before making wine, just like you shouldn't boil your honey before making mead. So that's my answer to that question. And then concerns with residues from large ag operations. Yeah, man, this is a huge problem because the bees travel 3 miles to make honey. Luckily, honey is hydrophilic, not oleophilic, and most ag residues are oil-based, so it's not going to get in your honey. It might get in your wax, though, so that's a problem for the bees and the beekeeper. The attempt to make organic honey on such a big area is to preclude the bees from having access to conventionally managed agriculture. So, yeah, it's like, hopefully if this model gets so successful and so compelling that we're changing the landscape and we're incentivizing landowners to go organic so they can get rents from organic beekeepers who sell to organic mead makers. But it's going to be a little ways off.
Good question. All right, next one is from Michaelan. Michaelan says, we're renovating 9 acres of non-certified organic farm in southeastern Pennsylvania, surrounded by corn and soy. Ooh, corn and soy. They're able to produce about a ton of honey last year and looking to increase a bit next year. I'm a beekeeper, permaculture designer, mead maker, gardener looking to start a meadery licensing in a year. Look to educational events with a full view of plants. Go to the question. Should we look, we want to work with our very local beekeepers, County Beekeepers Association. Most produce small amount and sell retail at about $10 a pound. Should we look to collaborate with them, but might mean at a higher cost?
Great. So I've got the question here in front of me. Michael, that is so awesome. I want to come visit your operation because, like, you're obviously doing it, and I want to help you succeed in doing it. So small beekeepers sell at $10 a pound because they're in the farmer's market, and it's a ton of time at the farmer's market, right? So they have to have a price that both pays them for their beekeeping and their time at the farmer's market. But what if you could buy all their honey in one swoop? They'd probably sell it to you for less because they have to spend way less time selling it. So what is that price? And what we're looking at for this organic model is like $5 a pound. And, you know, that might be hard for you to pull off with all the conventional corn and soy around you to get full-on certified organic. But at that price, like, I think you'd get some small local beekeepers going, wait, what? You'll buy all my honey and I don't have to go to the farmer's market and I'll get $4 to $5 a pound. Huh. Okay. So that's what I'm hoping happens as we kind of scale this operation up. For our specific case, our beekeeper is a full-on pollination beekeeper who just wants to diversify his model because he's seeing the risks that it's causing to his bees and his operation, and he wants to have more diversity in his business model. So he's willing to pull out 400 hives and give it a test. And that $5 a pound price point would definitely increase his honey profits. So, yeah, that is going to be a question. And your case is different than my case, so it'll probably have a different answer. But I think we can think about it together, and we can help both, you know, each other succeed by making good mead and promoting it and telling the regenerative story together.
Very cool. All right, question from Savan. Savan asks, what kind of hives are you using? Yeah, I'm super interested in that too.
Yeah, so Jimmy is a full-on industrial beekeeper. And so he's using Langstroth hives. And as we grow and as this matures, you know, I imagine there's going to be an opportunity to talk about what kind of hives are being used and how it affects the bees. So if someone wanted to use Top R and include that in their mead marketing, and someone wanted to use Ware, and someone wanted to use a Sun hive, and like all these, you know, hollow log hives, there's going to be this opportunity to tell that story, just like winemakers tell the story about the way that these grapes were grown versus those grapes and how that affects the wine. So we need you guys doing this if we're going to expand more rapidly and have a shot at making the change that we want to see.
Nice, that's cool. Because I remember you attend when you take PDCs. When I first did mine, I had a beekeeper in mine. He was talking about how, you know, the Langstroth is the most basic, but it might not be the best for bee health in the long run.
Yeah, it was designed, and it really revolutionized the industry. You know, it was designed to be able to pull honey without disrupting the hive that much. Like wax takes something like 8 times the amount of energy to make the same amount of wax for the same amount of honey. So a Langstroth hive allows you to just pull out a frame, extract the honey, and drop the frames back in without destroying any of the comb, whereas it's a lot more difficult in the other formats.
Nice. All right, Seema asks, why is the term organic emphasized?
Thanks, Seema. So organic honey has been really hard to pull off. In North America, or in the United States, we haven't adopted an official certification process for organic honey yet. Canada has, the EU has, and they require 3 kilometers of organic forage around the hive, but the U.S. is looking at 3 miles around the hive. So pulling off organic certification is really hard. Apparently there's some folks in Hawaii that do it, but I think they're driving through the loophole that if you're producing less than $5,000, you can call it organic, and if an inspector shows up, you have to show them why you justified that. But basically there is no organic certification process in North America because people think this 27 square mile requirement is kind of unmeetable. But with the unmeetable, that's kind of funny. With this opportunity at this preserve with 85,000 acres and 40,000 acres of certified organic, we have that kind of land. So emphasizing the organic piece is an opportunity to tell the market about the uniqueness and the, you know, kind of remarkable situation that we're setting up here. When you go beyond the permaculture community, organic is really a way to kind of pop people's mental bubbles. And we know that organic can mean plastic and totally unsustainable practices, and we want to go regenerative, we want to go beyond organic. But for the general population who we're trying to target with our new products to be able to offer a organic mead, we're just really stoked on that. And we're going to use that term to catch people's attention and lead into the regenerative conversation.
Cool. It's good. The one time I've ever seen mead in a Whole Foods was in Montana. It's weird. I can't find it in Berkeley or anywhere. Even in Berkeley, of hippie Berkeley of all places, there's no mead here.
Dude,
there's no mead.
On ours, we can ship it to you. But there's an awesome meadery in Point Reyes in Marin called Head. And Gordon Hull, who's the owner and mead maker there, has his own hives that he does a lot of his own. One batch that he makes there is made with his estate hives, and it's a really cool story, and it's a beautiful place, and it's all method Champenois style meads. He's still boiling his honey. We had this conversation, and I tried to convince him to stop doing it recently, but he's a really rad guy, and it's a beautiful place. And if you're looking for meat up there, that is a great place to go.
Nice, man. Okay, so Lyrian asks, quick, because shout out Christina says, oh my gosh, thank you so much for having organic cotton t-shirts on your site. So many organic eco companies don't do that. Yeah, organic shirts, that's damn straight.
One of our investors actually, full on skewered me on that. And I'm really proud that we made that switch a couple of iterations ago. But it's a good thing. Like, taking on investors is not always a scary thing, right? You've got, if it's the right people who care about the earth and, you know, want to find that optimal balance between economic return, environmental impact, and social impact, like, they're going to help you achieve your mission faster. And that was one of the ways. I also want to shout out to Laura Snow for asking for the link to the Mead Club. Thanks.
We just posted that in the quit, but if people still need the link, let me know. I'll send it to you. Lyrian asks, what type of yeast do you use? Where are they originally from? Are there types of mead that are fermented with indigenous biology already present in honey?
Oh, yeah. So that's super next level. And we do some wild fermentations. Like, we just released a mead for the Mead Club that was a wild fermentation. And the risk when you do that is that because mead is this thin broth and the honey is such an important part of the flavor profile, but the yeast is also an important part of the flavor profile. Like, you can think about yeast as little flavor machines. They take sugar in one end, spit out alcohol and carbon dioxide the other end, but in addition, depending on what kind of sugar they're taking in and what its constituent components are in terms of esters and other volatile organic compounds, it might spit out totally different esters and volatile organic compounds. So we've done a ton of experiments with different yeasts, and we found that different honeys and different yeasts make different kinds of mead. So to kind of control our outcomes, we've settled on a few yeasts that we really like to use. One of them is Safale 05, which is a beer yeast, and I think it was identified and isolated in Germany or Britain, and then got, labbed, and they process it up and use some pretty intense industrial manufacturing processes to make it. And that's kind of definitely a next step, an opportunity for encouraging the regenerative business model, like really developing our own yeasts and banking them. But right now we're focused on the mead, we're focused on the bees, and our ability to make the biggest impact there. So we're going to table that for a future date. But if other people want to work on it, I'm down. Then we've used wild yeast and sour yeast, so lactobacillus. Oh, I was going to call out another yeast that we like to use. So we've used Safale 05. It's an ale yeast, and it produces some nice ale characteristics. It'll ferment a 23% residual sugar down to like a 12% alcohol mead in 2 to 3 weeks, and then be ready to sell in 4 to 5 weeks. So it's a solid, like, workhorse yeast. We've used Sensi, which is a wine yeast that probably comes from Germany, and has some really great aromatic production capacity. And then we're getting turned on to a WLP 375, which is a champagne yeast. Champagne yeast can be tricky because they may need some aging to age out some of the other characteristics. Like, you want low sulfur producing yeast when you're choosing a yeast for a mead. And you want to give them the nutrients that they need. So you need to look at your yeast available nitrogen levels and really make sure that you're giving them the yeast available nitrogen that they need in the first 3 days of fermentation, and then not giving them more after that, because then you risk having nitrogen that isn't fermented and ends up tasting like chewable vitamins on the back end. So when you use wild yeast, though, it's like totally a crapshoot. And it can be awesome, and it can be nasty, and it can be any one of those things, even when you're harvesting your own yeast and thinking that you're using the same thing over and over. So our sour program, which took us 2 years to develop, like between our first sour that we were like, oh, this is awesome, and our first batch that we were like, okay, we finally reliably repeated our outcome, took 2 years. So please buy our mead. So if you want to do souring programs and use wild yeast, it's really tricky. Our lactobacillus is available through a local yeast company. It's called Mead Souring Organism, available from Real Brewers Yeast. And they're just down the street from us. But other people have had varied results with it. So far, so good for us. We've done 4 commercial batches with it so far. We have James Faw at Real Brewers Yeast make us a new pitch every time that we go to use it. So we're pretty confident that it's working, and it seems to have come from the lactose present in the honey. Based off of Fall's analysis, he was like, this isn't like any lacto I've ever seen in the typical beer yogurt world. So, yeah, that was a complex answer to a complex question. Hopefully, it was relatively clear. To summarize, I would say ale yeast, Safale 05, wine yeast, Sensi. We love those yeasts. If you want to do sour experiments on your own, go for it. But, be warned that outcomes can really vary. And if you want to do sour meads with the yeast available at Real Brewers Yeast, hit him up. He'll ship you some.
And here I was thinking the process was just leave honey and water in a tank for a few months. I guess it's more...
With a big balloon on top.
Exactly. Well, good on you. Shout out to WLP 137 Champagne Yeasts. That's cool, man. Go ahead. 375. Okay, cool. I had a quick question. It looks like we're through most of the questions. You and I, you were at Permaculture Voices too, and the biggest keynote was Paul Stamets, who had a story about how bears scratched the trees in the old growth forests, and that eventually led them to a story about how he created a treatment for colony collapse disorder and the varroa mite through fungi. And you're working with a guy who's working on vaccines for colony collapse disorder. Can't you just call up Paul Stamets or order from him and be like, hey, give me some of that fungal treatment?
Wow. Well, so Dr. James and I is working on a vaccine for Nosema, which is it's a fungal infection. Oh. It's a dysentery. But yeah, maybe I know Stamets is all about the bees. Apparently he met with Patagonia Provisions a couple of weeks ago and talked mushrooms and bees for a long time. Stamets, yeah. And actually, we were talking to him about a way to reliably prevent re-fermentation without using chemical stabilizers, but instead using mushrooms, because there's some mushrooms that apparently kill yeast. So the channels are open, and maybe I should reach out to them again and make them aware of this vaccine and see if there's a way to get it out through his kind of distribution channels. That's probably a really cool idea. And then link up Nye and Stamets to do some research on his fungal treatments for the mites, because, yeah, the mites are, if beekeepers could have a silver bullet, it would be how to kill varroa mites.
Yeah. I think we ought to cut the recording here.
Sandra's got a question.
Yeah, we're at 75 minutes. Yeah, what's Sandra say?
A quick shout out before we cut the recording, just for people listening on replay. I'll be the presenter real quick. Okay, in case any of you are in here for the first time, we have new webinars each week on sustainable design. Next week we have Kay Baxter, and that's going to be really great. I studied and worked with her in New Zealand. She's a fantastic, phenomenal researcher on nutrient-dense food. She's a seed saver that's renowned in New Zealand. That's going to be a really good one to sign up for. So sign up for Sustainable Design Masterclass if you haven't already. It's sustainabledesignmasterclass.com. You get weekly free webinar access with a free replay. And if you haven't got any Frank's Mead yet, you got to do it. It's fantastic. Go to goldcoastmead.com, and there's a Mead of the Month club. That looks really, really cool. Wait, make sure I'm on the right one. Yeah, get the Mead of the Month club, or you can order the meads individually, and they're phenomenal. I ordered a bunch, and I'm stoked to get it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
You bet.
Okay. Time to cut the recording. So here we go.
Frank, I don't know